We've looked at a couple of iconic planes on this channel recently that seem to be destined to keep flying long past their original design life, including the Boeing B-52 and the Lockheed C-5. But there is one more that you would have thought would have been made redundant long ago by advances in technology and an ever-changing political climate. And yet the Lockheed U-2 spy plane has outlived the SR-71 Blackbird, its direct successor, and survived the widespread uptake of spy satellites and even surveillance drones like the Global Hawk. So why is it still flying and still spying 65 years on and destined to continue for another 30 years more? Our sponsor for this video is Audible, which is something I found really quite interesting. Just in case you don't know, Audible is the leading supplier of spoken word entertainment, but it's not just about audiobooks of the latest bestsellers. They cover virtually anything that's been written. So there are memoirs, business, motivation, science, history, but also podcasts, shows, guided fitness, meditation, and even sleep tracks to help you rest, all from a single app on your smartphone, tablet or computer. You can also download the titles and listen offline anywhere, anytime, so no signal, no problem. So why do I like Audible and why do I think that you may well too? Well, for whatever reason, I find I have very little free time nowadays, and when I do, there's always something that needs doing. But there are times when I'm cycling, either spin cycling indoors in the winter or outdoors in the summer, where I have an hour or so where I can't do anything else but listen. And for me, that's when Audible comes into its own, and I can then catch up on many of the books which I couldn't finish before, plus much more. So maybe you commute to work, walk the dog, decorate the house. There are thousands of audiobooks, podcasts and shows that you can now enjoy when you have those times when you can't do anything else but listen. You can try Audible now free for 30 days by going to audible.com/CuriousDroid or by texting CuriousDroid to 500 500. If any plane looked like it was destined to have a short operational life back in the early 1960s, you would have thought it would have been the Lockheed U-2. Its mission was to overfly the Soviet Union at a time when there was no other way to gain intelligence on what they were doing, in particular with regard to the number of nuclear bombers and missiles they were believed to have. It was designed to fly at 70,000 feet, higher than any previous aircraft, and at a time when the main threat was from anti-aircraft guns and cannons mounted to interceptors, but still beyond the range of Soviet fighters and missiles and radar. All of that changed on May 1st, 1960, when a U-2 flown by the US pilot Gary Powers was shot down over central Russia by a Soviet surface-to-air missile, whilst on a spying mission from Pakistan to Norway. The aftermath was that the US was forced into an embarrassing climb down, and all U-2 overflights of the Soviet Union were stopped immediately. And the use of the U-2 was scaled back so much so that by 1966 just 15 of the original 55 U-2s built were in service. This had also shown that the Soviets had greatly increased the capabilities of their missiles and that 70,000 feet was no longer safe. This put the CIA and the US in general into a tailspin, and the whole theory of high-altitude aircraft was upended and changed to a new emphasis of high-speed, low-altitude missions for aircraft like the B-52, B-47 and B-58 bombers, which had been designed for high altitude. It also accelerated both the Corona spy satellite program as well as the CIA's A-12 Oxcart, which went on to become the SR-71 Blackbird. Both of these were to prove very successful in the continuation of the US reconnaissance, but more importantly, they were out of reach of Soviet air defences. So if the writing was on the wall for the U-2, why did it continue to be used? Well, put it simply, there was nothing around to take its place, and the US still needed the vital information. Overflying at 70,000 feet may have stopped, but at that altitude the pilot can see for 250 miles or 400 kilometres in any direction, and the U-2 could still fly along the borders of a country and peer deep into it. Nowadays, it uses new technology to eavesdrop on electronic communications and advanced multi-spectrum sensors that can not only see in the dark, but also through haze and clouds. But traditional wet film cameras still produce the best quality at above 70,000 feet. A typical flight would produce a 90 kilogram, 3.2 kilometer roll of film, which has to be developed and analysed by eye. This is such a huge task because one roll of film could cover an area the size of California with a resolution down to 20 centimeters. So that only about 5% of the film can be analysed by a human analyst because there just isn't enough time or people to do the job. So in 2018, the Air Force trialled a method using AI to scan the film to look for things like cars, trucks, planes, buildings, and even people on the ground, and highlight potential targets for further human investigation. And this brings us on to spy satellites, one of the very things that were meant to make the U-2 redundant. Now, as good as they are with the ability to see objects just a few centimeters across from the safety of space, what they can't do is loiter around and watch for longer periods of time. They're also predictable, following fixed orbits around the Earth, allowing adversaries to hide when they know they're flying overhead. Knowing their flight path also makes them increasingly vulnerable to anti-satellite weapons, such as lasers to blind their optics, jamming, and even anti-satellite missiles which could destroy them. This is where the U-2 still works as well as it did in the 1950s. Back then, with no agents on the ground, the US president needed to know what the Soviets were up to, and quickly. U-2s could be moved into position within hours and mark the shift from ground-based intelligence of spies and agents to technical intelligence from afar. One major issue that the U-2 does have is that it's not a very stealthy aircraft and not that fast. In fact, the Soviets could track them before the Powers incident, but until then, they couldn't get their missiles to lock on or their interceptors to fly that high. All that changed with the Powers incident, and that kick-started the development of a plane which was to replace the U-2, the SR-71 Blackbird, an aircraft that flew so high and so fast that even the missiles couldn't keep up with it. But all that technology came with a very large price tag as well as technical difficulties. 85% of the fuselage was made from titanium, again hugely expensive, difficult to work, and due to its rarity, most of it had to be imported into the US, ironically from the place which had the largest reserves, the Soviet Union, via CIA front companies. If the Soviets had ever gotten wind of this, then that would have spelt the end for the SR-71. Building them was expensive, but running them was even more so. Special fuel called JP7 had to be developed because the fuselage became so hot when flying at Mach 3 that normal jet fuel could self-ignite in the fuel tanks. JP7 had a much higher flash point and could withstand the 150 degrees C that it would reach. In fact, as the fuel went down in the tanks, it was replaced with nitrogen gas to help stop ignition as well. This meant that the SR-71 had to have a dedicated fleet of KC-135 tankers set up to handle the JP7. When it was on the ground, the loose fit of the titanium panels, which was required because of the large expansion and contraction cycles, meant that every one of the SR-71s leaked fuel, to the extent that there would be a large fuel stain on the ground under the aircraft. Luckily, because of the high temperature nature of JP7, it makes it very difficult to ignite. In fact, to start the engines, they use shots of highly toxic and dangerous hypergolic fuel, triethylborane or TEB, which ignites on contact with air. It said that you could drop a lit match into a bucket of JP7 and it wouldn't ignite. Getting an SR-71 into the air was also far more complicated and took many hours of preparation, more like a space launch than a normal takeoff. All of this added to the bill. It said that each SR-71 mission cost between $80,000 and $200,000 per hour to run. The U-2 by comparison was in the region of $30,000 per hour. Now you would think that by 1980, with the SR-71 ruling the roost, that the U-2 would be dead in the water. But no, the U-2 was brought back into production, which was difficult because many of the original engineers and technicians from the 50s had retired. The new version had a nearly 40% bigger body, more powerful engine and a modular construction to allow for more and heavier equipment, and also to allow it to be swapped out depending upon the mission. But it hasn't stopped there, and upgrades have kept on coming, and as of 2020 there were still 33 of the later U-2s still in active service. Although they were made in the early 1980s, they still have about 80% or so of their design life left. Thanks to the modular nature of the newer version, the U-2 of today can fly twice as far for 3 times as long as the original version, and in 2020 it had another significant sensor upgrade and can cover other advanced equipment including synthetic aperture radar, signals intelligence electronics and communications gear. It's also used as a test platform for new technologies, both highly classified and science-based for the likes of NASA. The U-2 helped pioneer the use of data links between satellites and ground forces when line of sight is lost, and it can also now use this to allow its sensor data to be shared with other advanced aircraft like the F-35 and F-22 and the rest of the digital battlefield. And this is where we get to the main point of the U-2, a 65-year-old design created shortly after the Second World War. It can still do the job it was designed for, as good as or better than many of the newer systems, and for a lot less money, and it's here now and working with a long track record of success. So why not continue? With the sky-high costs of developing a replacement, the very long development times and all the issues which have seemed to bedevil previous attempts, it's hardly surprising that, like the other post-war design stalwart, the B-52, with the latest round of updates, there is no retirement date planned. So we can expect to see the U-2 on the books for at least the next 30 years. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then don't forget to subscribe, thumbs up and share. And I'd also like to say a big thank you to all of our patrons for their ongoing support.